What's going on, guys? This is the 5 Year Pass channel once again. And today we'll be talking about the Hall of Fame podcast with me, Suri, and this is Sham. And as I said, we'll be talking about our picks for who we think should be in the Premier League Hall of Fame podcast. So before we get going and talk about our picks, Sham wants to explain the criteria before I outshine him. Go on, Sham.
Absolutely.
Wait, how are you, Sham, by the way?
I'm good. I'm really looking forward to being outshone. It was great.
Yeah.
No, all good, all good. Look, just wanted to run through some of the criteria first. I'm quite excited about this, but I thought at least we could put some rules in place. So, First rule is we're going to pick 11 players and a manager. I want to make it very clear we're not picking a formation or a team. We're just picking 11 players. So we could pick 11 goalkeepers or 11 strikers. We don't know. So 11 players and a manager. It's based purely on performances in the Premier League. So if they played in the old First Division before the Premier League, I don't care. Performances for their country, don't care. Performances for clubs other than EPL clubs, do not care. So if Ronaldo, for example, moves to Madrid, we're not taking into account his Real Madrid performances, just his Man United performances, and not Lisbon, not Juventus, and all of that, obviously. So just wanted to get those rules sort of clear before we crack on with it.
And I think we said this before as well. We're going to do a kind of a consensus kind of thing. Obviously, it's going to be, like if we said, I think it's pretty obvious, like Sir Alex, for example, I think we both have him as, we would both say yes to it. But if you said Giggs, I would have points to kind of pick at that,
absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
So we might,
Can we go 1 for 1? I think
we'll try 1 for 1. Something I wanted to say before we went as well, just, I actually forgot what it was, but we'll start with the manager. So look, I was going to go with Ferguson like yourself. I think that at the point in time he retired, he'd won more than half of the Premier League titles. I think more than that, he'd built multiple great teams. So Mourinho had a great team in the mid-2000s. That Chelsea team looked invincible. Even Klopp and Guardiola now, their teams look pretty invincible. But Ferguson had multiple teams. Other teams came past him, and then he got back past them again. So even someone like Arsene Wenger, who did really well when he started with that 98 double and the 04 Invincibles team, when he fell off a bit, he wasn't able to get the team back. And there were criticisms over his second spot. Ferguson had that lull period, but he was able to come back. And I think that that's what separates Fergie from Wenger and the others.
Absolutely, man. Even if you look at United won, missed out to Blackburn by a point, missed out to Chelsea, Arsenal by a point, missed out to Man City with goal difference. You're talking about 15 Premier League titles. I have it here. 15 Premier League titles. That could have been easily 18. Give it take a bit of luck and a couple more goals. If they hadn't lost 6-1 against Man City in that season, I mean, there's no debating this. It's going to be propping him up.
It's probably our easiest choice, I suspect.
He's won 4 League Managers of the Year, League Manager Association Awards of the Year, 11 Managers of the Season. There's no, and if you think about it as well, his kind of children, his managerial children, that concept of producing more managers, Ollie, Steve Bruce, Mark Hughes, Gordon Strachan, Ryan Giggs, Nicky Butt, now the head of the youth development.
Even Roy Keane, Robson, all went into management.
Roy Keane. And just before we finish up, a point he said at I think it was Rio's testimonial. It was a testimonial that he managed. Oh no, it was the Class of '92 testimonial, something like that, but 2 years ago. And he said something about all his players, like he loved to see his players grow up as good humans, good kind of members of society beyond that. So just as a kind of non-footballing point, So I think there's no debating that. So you go first, Sham, your first player.
Okay, so I thought we could break this roughly into sections. So maybe we'll try and work from goalkeepers through to strikers. So maybe goalkeepers, defenders. I've gone with centre mids, attacking mids, which includes wingers and strikers. So we'll try and break it roughly into that. And we might have to pick some automatically and put some on the side to come back to, if you know what I mean. But we'll try and work
if we don't agree on something.
If we don't agree, we might put it away and work through the rest and come back to the ones that we're not quite sure. So I'll start with goals. For me, probably 3 great keepers of the Premier League era that come to mind. Schmeichel, Petr Cech, and Van der Sar. They for me looked the hardest to beat when they were in goals. of those three, I'm probably only going to go for one. I'm going to go with Peter Schmeichel. I think just the way that he inspired his team and elevated them, particularly with the younger class of '92 coming across. Some great individual performances that season to help the team win, particularly after when those boys were coming in. Petr Cech I rate really highly. I probably the two sort of negative points on him. I think one was that he didn't have a massive personality. He's not a particularly memorable player, and it's a bit of an intangible. But he was incredibly. He was intimidating by his presence, but not by spoken word. He looked unstoppable at times, and I think also he wasn't quite the same after he got the head injury. The Reading player Hunt, he got the accidentally kneed him in the head, but quite heavily to the point where he had to wear the rugby mask for the rest of his career. So that's probably Czech might be one I might put on the side and come back to. Van der Sar, he didn't have the longevity perhaps of the other two, but was a brilliant keeper, and I think he's worth a mention. But now I'm just going to go with putting Schmeichel up there as my first player and just mention the other two.
Okay, so I'll go. I don't have a keeper myself. Not that I don't disagree with Schmeichel. I think it's consensus as well. But I think David Seaman would be in there as well. I remember David Seaman when I started watching football. Good keeper, probably not in the same caliber as those three, but just a kind of a special mention kind of thing, you know?
Yeah, I mean, some players some players have shorter careers and have big impact. Some players play for a very long time and are very consistent. He was probably the latter. The thing about Seaman, apart from his very unfortunate name, is probably the fact that he made a couple of quite high-profile mistakes, and not necessarily in the Premier League, but there's the Ronaldinho free kick in the 2002 World Cup. Yeah. There was I think it was a Cup Winners' Cup final. There was a UEFA Cup final in the last minute of extra time. He spilled the ball. The guy just punted from halfway and he spilled it over the line. I know it's not a Premier League performance, but when you think of the name Seaman, you just tend to think of a couple of those sort of high-profile mistakes, and that dodgy haircut. But apart from that, very consistent keeper for a very long time. Definitely worth a mention, I think. Yeah.
Okay, so for me, I have two defenders. I'll say one. Do you have a defender in yours?
I have a couple. Yeah.
Okay. So I got with John Terry. I know he said the Premier League performance, but I'll just kind of rant off a little bit of what he's done. And let's put, everyone fucks up. So let's put away what he's done. So 717 appearances, very notably 15 goals conceded in the 04-05 season. Still the best record ever. 17 straight seasons with Chelsea, 4 Premier Leagues, 5 FA Cups, 3 League Cups, and obviously England captain, taken away and given back again. Look, for me, probably the best.
I agree. I think he's a consensus pick for the Premier League Hall of Fame. They may take into account, I know I talked a bit about Seaman and his stuff off the field, as in for other competitions. And Terry, in regards to getting into an actual Hall of Fame, that off-field record, that's a little check of my count against him, but purely as a player, he basically carried Chelsea for about a good 10 to 15 years. I think it was 5 Premier League titles he got in the end.
Yeah, 5, yeah. 4.
Yeah, and he embodies for his generation that strong, strong-bodied, strong-minded, strong-willed, that English centre-back, that archetypal footballer that he was in terms of his on-field performances. In terms of
arguably the last of his kind of generation as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I said arguably the last of his type,
Yeah, you look at English fullbacks now, Maguire's not quite there. Gomez, guys like that you don't think of, John Terry or Tony Adams, or was it Terry Butcher with the wound on his head with the blood weeping out? That's that sort of that footballer. John Terry was probably the last of that type. Absolutely. I agree with him being in there. I think that's pretty straightforward.
All right.
I will go with one more defender, which is Rio Ferdinand. John Terry's England teammate, and they had a bit of a checkered story with Anton's issue there with the racism. But Rio, I think there are people who say that he was a better footballer than John Terry, and he probably was. I think John Terry was a better defender, but I think Rio was a better footballer. But he was good on the ball. He was quick. He didn't see it so much on the field earlier in his career, but you look at guys who play with him afterwards, they see him as a very strong personality and as a leader. Score goals in big moments. Incredibly good defender. I think he was, like I said, a better footballer than Terry, but I think the two of them together at the back, I think if you were to pick a Premier League all-time 11, you'd be hard-pressed to get past those two.
I don't disagree, but I have someone over Rio. For me, it was Vincent Kompany, because I think so that's my second pick. I think because Vincent Company had more of a job to do than Rio. You could argue that Vincent Company was one of the kind of the spearheads of what Man City is today. So, you know, how many years was he at Man City? About 9 years, 260 appearances, 4 league titles, a couple of FA Cups in there, and no Champions League. But yeah, that for me, that's my second pick. Just devil's advocate. Look, I do agree Rio, but I also for me, Vincent Company comes in third
would have
or
been
fourth.
if I had to pick a third one, it would have been Vincent Company. I think it's easy to forget him because he's just retired, but I had him here just as someone to take into account. I think that, like you said, the way that he lifted Man City, Rio, I think helped lift United, but not to the extent that Company did with, because Rio was a record signing. He had the high expectations to fill them. Company almost came out of nowhere from Anderlecht, right? And
for a centre back, the two moments for me. The two moments for me that stick out were Leicester last year, or 2 seasons ago now. That goal, I mean, and then he celebrates in the same way he did against United in 2012 when he scored that header to put them on level point. No, put them on level points. He's amazing. Like, there's not much to say. There's not many bad things to say. And just as someone who goes off the pitch, exemplary, kind of scandal-free, you know, compared to a lot of the names in here.
Absolutely.
Yeah, kind of the Barack
Ferdinand was
Obama
pretty
football.
clean, but he did have that issue with the suspension for the missing the drug test and all that.
Yeah, but also generally getting embroiled in this rate. Like, I'm not saying it's his fault, but, you know, you just feel like Vincent Company for me is like the Barack Obama of football, just clean, you know?
Yeah.
Did a 4-year term.
What's the nickname they had for him in Singapore?
Sorry.
What's the nickname? The fish? What's it called?
Who? Oh, Lohan fish with the big forehead. Yeah,
there's a fish in Singapore with that big forehead. Yeah. He's always called Lohan in Singapore. Really, yeah. I think those 3 names, I'm happy to put up those 3 names and we can break it down a little bit later. I thought just in terms of mentioning them, I'm not putting their name up for selection, but I thought Gary Neville and Ashley Cole were worth a mention. I think Gary was very consistent over a long period of time, got the most out of his ability. I think he ended up with 11 Premier League titles as well. Not a player you'd build a team around, but definitely got the best out of his ability and did contribute to the success of United. And I think Ashley Cole, very similar with Arsenal and then Chelsea as well, to have the success he had with both of those clubs. Obviously played for England for a very long time, but both of them had really good careers. I'm not nominating them, but I thought it was just worth mentioning them as defenders.
I think Ashley Cole might be the best fullback in the Premier League era, including the Liverpool ones of today. He's skillful, fast, scored about probably 5-7 goals every year. Important goals as well.
It'd be hard to compare him to some of the modern day players, but if those modern day players played at that level for a while, you'd think they'd be somewhere around his level of ability, which shows that how good he was. The only one I'd put up with him would be someone like Dennis Irwin, but Dennis Irwin was always an unsung hero. I remember Keenan Vieira had a show where they picked their best they picked their best 11s, and then they tried making a joint one, and they could not split Irwin and Cole, so they ended up being a best 12. They had a massive fight over left back. They picked all the other positions, but they couldn't separate Cole and Irwin at left back.
Dennis Irwin is also where Keane is from, which is Cork. They're both Cork boys, so there's probably that added, Irish.
This will sound funny, but he was my favorite United player growing up. He was just such I always liked the unsung heroes. He was always just such a clubman, did everything professionally. Yeah, again, a bit like Gary, got the best out of his ability, but I think he had a bit more ability than Gary Neville. Genuinely 2-footed, play left back, play right back. Took set pieces before Beckham came along.
All right. Is it you go?
It's your go. Yeah. So we'll go to centre midfield now.
We're going to midfield.
I'll start with centre midfield, and this is part of the reason I wanted to do this video, because there's a couple of these types of videos I've seen. So there was the Geordie, I forget what they called, the Geordie. True Geordie. Yeah. He did a really good one on just best keeper, defender, midfielder, manager type, striker type of thing. I like that one. I then saw one, it was a bit older than that. It was Lineker, Shearer, Danny Murphy, Ian Wright picking a Premier League 11. And I got really pissed watching the video, because of all the midfielders they could pick, they'd picked a 4-4-2 and they put Gerrard and Lampard in the centre midfield. And it really annoyed me. And it was kind of one of the motivations to do this particular video, just to look at players as opposed to sort of being trapped within a formation. So in regards to midfielders, the first name I'm going to put up is Roy Keane. I think that his battles with Vieira, I think, defined the early. When I grew up, it was all about Man United and Arsenal. It was all about Keane versus Vieira. It spilled over in 2004, but it was gone for a good 6, 7 years before that. You know, he came to United as a record signing in British football, and just really helped, just through sheer force of will, helped turn United into that trophy winning machine, the Premier League winning machine. And I think one thing that he did, because Ferguson never did this after Keane left, but with Keane and Ferguson there, they were able to win titles with quite transitional teams, not teams that were so much at their apex. They had teams that had significant sort of holes in them, but just through his sheer force of will. And he was a bloody good footballer as well. He did all the simple things really well. He was not a guy who would run at 4 players and beat them, but everything he did well, and he was quality in that regard. And I think his abilities of football is very underrated because of that sort of the shift, that mentality you associate with him, the physicality you associate with him. I think his abilities of football is very underrated.
Yeah, Roy Keane's mine as well. I have one midfielder in here. It's Roy Keane.
One midfielder.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I had 4. So,
do you have some of Roy Keane's stats up? Because I didn't get a chance to like.
I just want to kind of actually.
Yeah. Let me just. While we talk about him, he's one of my favorite. I mean, he's a bit of the Michael Jordan of United at the time, and it kind of was the same era as well if you think about it, right? 480 games, 51 goals, 1, 2, 3,
51 goals. 5. You wouldn't associate him with scoring too many goals.
7 league titles, 4 FA Cups, Champions League, obviously. Player of the year.
But people said that about that United team when they played, Beckham, Giggs, Scholes, and Keane. They could score. Anyone in the front 6 could score. That was always the threat with United. And he was probably the most defensive of that front 6. So, yeah, it was an underrated part of his game. I always remember watching him run in straight lines through the channels, and particularly the right channel, and getting onto the ball and just lashing it in. Yeah,
there's very few kind of guys who mix that pure in sport. I'm not talking about football alone, but like in sport. And I remember in AFL, like I remember seeing Chris Judd and thinking the same thing, where this guy's a baller, but he's also pure physicality as well. And then you have talent and physicality, and like a Buddy Franklin would be, for example, pure genius, but would you question his kind of work ethic a little bit, at some points in his career, but you never do that with King or with like a Michael Jordan, but even I'd hesitate to put him in, but he's a mentioned Yaya Toure, for example. 90 minutes of running and 90 minutes of balling. So anyway.
And I wasn't going to put him up, but I was going to mention him. He could play anywhere from centre back to attacking midfield. I mean, he had incredible versatility. He could score goals, could dominate games. I've seen videos of him playing in the Chinese second league, and it looks like, those like videos where you get like Cristiano Ronaldo on the football field with like 100 children and they're all running around him. Like Yaya in the Chinese second division looks like that,
It's crazy, yeah. Notable mention as well, Steven Gerrard. I mean, one of my favorites growing up. Unfortunately, never won a league title. But in many ways carried Liverpool. They would have been languishing in mid-table if not for him. 3 times runner-up, 700 appearances, 186 goals, 17 years of consistency. And even the 2 times, like besides 01-02 when they came second, which Arsenal ran away with, in 08 and 13-14, they were so close, United and City won at 14.
He couldn't have possibly done more. I mean, that slip will always live with him. It's always that thing that we always remember about him. But there's so much more to remember about him as well. Like the other seasons that he played, you can't think of anything else that he could have done to uplift that team. It was just like he was at times a one-man band, but what a band, Like he was an incredible footballer. Absolutely.
Yeah. Do you have any more sentiments or any more midfielders in general?
I think when we talk about midfielders in the Premier League, we mentioned Keane and Gerrard. The other 3 I think are worth a mention. I would have Patrick Vieira up there. I think that he is, as a footballer, he versus Keane. I think people underestimate how much that defined that era, that battle between those 2. And just a quality footballer, strode around, bit like Yaya in his day, just strode around with those really long legs. I'm not referring to his classiness, athleticness, but just could dominate and boss at the center midfield.
Vieira left in
For 5,
2006, 2005. Okay, and it took about 7 years to try and replace him.
Yeah,
7 years to try and replace him.
They never really have.
And then they realized they couldn't replace him, so they just changed the way they played. That's how good he was. Yeah,
absolutely.
I remember when he left, and I remember I wouldn't have had the football kind of nuance that I have now. Not that I'm amazing, but like the understanding, I guess. But I remember thinking then, like when I was 15, 16, I'm like, man, they're not going to replace a player like him. And I barely knew about football back then, and that's how immense he was. Yeah, definitely World Cup winning as well. I know it's not Premier League, but he has the credentials, as a world class player.
Yeah, I thought it was worth.
No Champions League.
No Champions League. It was funny because he wanted to go to Juventus for so many years, and then he went, and then they got relegated after one season because of the match fixing scandal. So it wasn't quite the same, and he was older at that point in time as well. But I thought that, I thought he was worth a mention. Probably the other two. I'm mentioning Frank Lampard. I'm not going to put him in. I just thought his level of consistency in goal scoring, probably. I think he's probably a bit like Gary Neville. Like he got the best out of everything that he had. I don't think that he was a brilliant good footballer, but a very, very good one who got everything out of himself. And the mark against him is when you think of that Chelsea team, you tend to think of other players like Cech and Terry that I've mentioned, and there's a couple of others as well. So I just probably thought he was worth a mention, but I'm not going to nominate him. One I would like to nominate is Paul Scholes, though. I think the way that he's probably a player who doesn't get so much attention. He doesn't seem to want the attention either. I think I heard somewhere the only sponsor he ever had was for his boots. Like he never had any sort of sponsor throughout his whole career. Yeah. And it was it wasn't like Adidas or Nike. It was like Diodora or something. Like
it was Umbro. I think it was Umbro.
I remember seeing ads for him and Keane wearing Diodora at one point, but he probably could have changed boot sponsors.
Not only did he not have sponsorships and all that, he never even had an agent. He had a lawyer. Lawyer would come in to do the contract stuff.
And when you talk about that United team, particularly the first 20 years of the Premier League, particularly to that time Ferguson retired, United were the dominant side. And every player that went through there, you ask them who they thought the best player was, it was Paul Scholes. And when he retired, I can't think of a footballer who retired who had more people come out like Zidane and Xavi and all of these guys come out and say he was the best footballer that they had played against. I've not seen another player of that era or ilk, or that I can't see anyone that I recall that retired, and so many people chose at that point to come out and to celebrate him the way that he was. I think just had such incredible awareness of the game.
Paul Scholes for me is a players Hall of Fame guy. He's not a fans Hall of Fame guy.
And he's probably not a administrative or whatever you call it.
Yeah, he'd be a case study for people who want to do coaching, but he's just as purely kind of, people never going to understand how much of a baller he was because he never did the fancy things. He's not a Kevin, you could say people like, that kind of ilk today would be a David Silva or a Juan Mata. But I would put him in, but I can understand why people would forget him. But yeah, look, that's hard to disagree with that as well. So we have, who do we have? Who was your picks again? We had Keane mutually.
There's 7 names that we've put up that we can break through, but Terry, Ferdinand, Company, and then a midfield.
No, I mean your midfielders.
Yeah, Keane, Scholes, Gerrard, and Vieira, probably the 4 that's just purely central midfielders.
Yeah, perfect.
I'm not talking about wide players at all, so it's about 7.
I only have 2 left. I have 2 strikers left. I went strictly 5. And
really?
Yeah, I went strict 5.
I went for 11. Okay.